Hi, everybody. This is Steve Bennett with the Bennett Collection. Dr. Samuel Peralta is a true Renaissance man, perhaps best known as the creator and series editor of the speculative science fiction anthologies, The Future Chronicles. Dr. Peralta is a best-selling author, poet, film producer, digital technologist, entrepreneur, and senior executive. Born in the Philippines in 1962, Samuel Peralta received his PhD in physics from the University of Wales in the United Kingdom, and thereafter established himself in Ontario, Canada. From this place, he has spent the last 33 years involved in numerous business and creative pursuits. For example, he led Ontario Hydro's acquisition of Texas Instruments solar subsidiary, has written works that have been bestsellers and hit the bestseller list of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. In addition, he has a significant underground reputation as an independent film producer. Among the dozens of films he has produced are The Fencer, which earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Foreign Language Film, and Real Artists, which won a non-primetime Emmy for Best Arts Special. Most recently, Dr. Peralta has received recognition for his sponsorship of an art payload, the Peregrine Collection, which is set to take off aboard the Peregrine Lunar Lander on United Launch Alliance's Vulcan Centaur rocket in 2021. This payload is set to include an assembly of creative works by over 1,200 creative artists, as well as one work created by artificial intelligence, and will be left in the Lacus Mortis region of the moon. I understand, and this is the first announcement of it, he has also had an art payload, the Nova Collection, that will be aboard Intuitive Machines Nova C lunar lander on SpaceX's Falcon 9, which will head to the moon later this year. The two collections are consolidated in what he calls the Lunar Codex, which may expand even more over 2022 as he works with other partners in NASA's Commercial Lunar Lander program. Dr. Samuel Peralta, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you. Let's jump right in. I'd like you to kind of give us a sense of how you came to the concept of putting art in space and what your conceptual foundations were for doing it.
Well, it all started, obviously, when NASA began contemplating a return to the moon. That's the Artemis program that it's building at the moment. The last time we went to the moon was, at least the United States, was 50 years ago, significantly during the Apollo program. So NASA's going back to the moon was the first impetus for this. And the second was that NASA decided it was out of the business of actually building rockets and building lunar landers. And instead it would be a commercial client of private industry. This is what led companies like Elon Musk's SpaceX to start businesses launching payloads for communications companies and things. So the whole SpaceX saga was due to NASA saying that they were out of the business and they would just simply become clients of folks like SpaceX. The same thing happens with the lunar landers. Once it said that it was intending to go to the moon, what it did was it started a program called the CLPS, the Commercial Lunar Partnership Payload Services Program. And it gave out contracts in the range of something like $70 to $100 million to various partners in order to do this. One of these was Astrobotic. One of the first ones was Astrobotic. So what Astrobotic did was it concentrated on building the lander itself. And what it did with regards to payload, besides the payloads that NASA was sending it, was it contracted them out to other partners. One of these was DHL, the logistics company. And DHL created a program called DHL Moonbox. And DHL Moonbox is essentially how we're getting to the moon on the Peregrine lander. There are various ways of doing this. When I first saw that they were producing a way for regular folks to go to the moon, what I did was I bought up a payload package, and a payload package is a hexagonal package. And this, if you were to buy something like this, reserve space like this, it would cost in the region of something like $6,000 to $8,000. It costs about, it ranges, they say for a kilogram worth of payload, it costs about $20,000 to get to the moon, right? But something like this costs much less, definitely. And what that does is it puts it in a range of regular folks like you and I, at least, who have a willingness to send something to the moon. And you can purchase payload space depending on the size. If you want it a little smaller, they've got a minimum size. If you want it bigger, then you can pay the moon for it.
So what format does your payload become? Do you put it on an SD card or something like that?
We do it in different ways. For Peregrine, what we've done is we've put it on SD card. So in this case, a micro SD card that's much like what you've got here. So it's a regular SD card, and you may say, well, how's that going to get up there and survive the rigors of the moon and cosmic rays and things like that? Well, a couple of things. A cosmic ray may pass through this and render one bit gone and render another bit gone and so on and so forth. But if you practice redundancy, let's say you put 2 of these with the same data on it, or 3 of these with the same data on it, or you put another card like this in another moon box in another part of the payload. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is to realize that NASA itself relies on memory. It's the same thing. They've got memory on board the spacecraft. So the spacecraft and the time capsule itself, which contains all of these, have got shielding to help it survive a little bit more. And so that's one way.
So how did you decide what to put on your payload? How did you curate your micro SD card for the moon?
The first thing that I did was essentially I put something of my own up there. Think of it as a haiku, just my own little piece of myself up on the moon, right? And really, I've got to give credit to Writers on the Moon for giving me the impetus to go forward. Writers on the Moon is a project that was put together by Susan K. Quinn. She's one of the authors that that's on board my Future Chronicles books. Actually, she's an independent writer and publisher, but she was also somebody who I've published maybe 6, 7, 8 times in my books. She's that good a writer. But what she did was she organized a group called Writers on the Moon. Writers of the Moon is a group of 125 authors, and she invited them to put their books on her SD card to go to the moon. And so I looked at that and I said, well, gosh, what am I going to put on in my memory allotment? And I was given a certain memory allotment. That was all. I got 20 megabytes essentially of memory space. So it kind of focuses you and says, 20 megabytes, I've got so much to put on there, right? And so everybody was basically said they would put on their best books, so on and so forth. What I did was, luckily, I'm an anthology publisher. And when I publish an anthology, I've got about a dozen authors in each book. And I've got about 25 of these anthologies. That means I've got stories from about 250 authors. So I packed 250 authors into my 20 megabytes of space. And I said, gosh, can I do more? And I packed more and more and more until I reached about 420 authors in my little space. Now, if you remember, the project Writers on the Moon was supposed to be 125 authors. And just my own little space, I was able to pack 400 plus. And I said, well, this is great. In fact, I make up, I make up a large part of the of what I now call Manifest 9 on the Writers on the Moon. But I was able to pack a lot of authors and a handful of artists. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could pack even more of this? I didn't have any more space on my own moon box, and Susan didn't have any more space on the Writers on the Moon box. So I started to scrounge around, and by this time we're advancing to the close of the payload deadline for Astrobotic. But amazingly, I found people who still had space. And so what I did was I bought up all of the memory space that I could. And once I knew how much memory space I had, I started saying, well, what am I going to put up there? I wanted to put up artists. How would I do this? And I've curated a couple of art exhibits in the past, but it occurred to me that Didi Menendez, who you and I both know, is the publisher.
Yes, Didi Mendez of Poets and Artists magazine.
That's right. She publishes Poets and Artists, which is a magazine that looks at figurative realism. And she also publishes exhibition catalogs. And all of these magazines and exhibition catalogs have been pre-curated. That means a person of some stature in the art field has already looked at the art that's in these magazines and exhibition catalogs and said that they were worthy, so to speak.
Dr. Schmidt, who is my wife, was the curator with Didi for the show, The Storytellers, which was shown in Australia. And if I'm not mistaken, Storytellers is included, I think, in one of the shows that found its way into your payload.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, the cover of Storytellers is a piece by Victoria Savenkova, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. And I have that piece in my collection. So that catalog, in fact, led me to purchasing that piece. That piece was curated by Dr. Schmidt, and because I had that piece and because I appreciated that the works in that catalog, I had that catalog on my hard drive. I had something on the order of 15, 20 catalogs from Poets Artists, and all I did was I looked at that, I asked the publisher for permission, and I just uploaded everything. Without looking at the artists, I knew already beforehand that the artists that would be almost without a doubt artists that I thought were good, and so by uploading all of that, it turned out that I had about 1,200 artists and writers in total, and that's what I call.
You certainly have a number of very happy and excited artists and curators. I've spoken to them. The very cutting edge nature of having your work on the moon, and presumably capable of being discovered, or shall we say rediscovered, by future generations of explorers is a very exciting idea.
Well, it has certainly caught the imagination of many people. I thought one of the things that underlay Writers on the Moon was the thought that we could spread the joy of being on the moon, which we recognize, to 125 writers and their stowaways and passengers, so to speak. So my contribution to that was in expanding that to what we call the artists on the moon, and bringing that joy to hundreds and more of creative artists, because now I've got up there not just writers, artists, but we also have filmmakers, we have musicians, we have songwriters, and we hope to expand more of that in the future as well. It's just
very exciting.
It is very exciting.
So for those of you, let me interrupt Samuel for just 1 second to say this is Steve Bennett with the Bennett Collection podcast. My guest has been Dr. Samuel Peralta, who is a true Renaissance man. He is a poet, an artist, a physicist, an entrepreneur, and a space curator as it relates to his work in placing art, both literature, poetry, and visual art on the moon. All right, Samuel, keep going. We're fascinated by all this. How do you think your background as a physicist informs some of the choices you're making as what I'm calling a space curator?
I've always loved science from the beginning. I've always loved writing from the beginning. When my dad told me, get a degree in science and write on the side because science is what's going to earn your keep. And he was right. He definitely was right. I was able to earn my keep, but write at the same time during my spare time. And it's been hard at times, but now that my career has matured to a certain degree, I've got the freedom to be able to do this. And what I like to do now, after my career in the high-tech and nuclear industries, is essentially pursue projects that bring me joy. And if possible, bring joy to others as well. It's that concept of being blessed and trying to spread the blessings. And because I like art and because I like culture, and I'm also steeped in technology, projects that basically are at the intersection of art and technology are things that are near and dear to my heart. That's why I threw myself into this project, the Lunar Codex, because it was very much the case where it was art and science mixed together. I grew up in my work was in laser physics, in spectroscopy, and it informs other aspects as well, because you were asking earlier about the storage medium and how we're putting things up on the moon. And another way that we can do that, besides these little memories, is by analog the means rather than digital. And what I mean by analog is by taking something like, if you look at the CD disc, essentially how CDs work is a laser etches little pits on the disc, and then another laser reads the pits on the disc to be able to make the sound. But you can also use lasers to etch little pictures on them, right? And as it happens, there's a technology that enables you to draw pictures that are very, very small and yet can be magnified so that they're perfectly in shape. It uses a very precise laser to etch on layers of nickel. And this technology is called nanofish, kind of like microfiche. If you think about microfiche, except that instead of putting it on polymer film, you're putting it on very flat nickel, you get an idea of what nanofiche is all about. Nanofiche is the technology that we're using, that we're piggybacking on to in the NOVA collection. That's what you just announced, and that's the collection that's going up on the Nova C lander by Intuitive Machines in 2021. It's a little bit different. It's a little hardier than the memory cards. You can't upload as much in as short a time. It takes time to do this, but it's certainly a good way of doing it as well. And so we're doing that for Nova C.
So have you curated the content for the Nova C lander as well, or are you still putting that together?
We're in the middle of putting that together. At the moment, what it consists of is it consists of work from my own collection. It consists of work from artists that I thought, whoops, they did. I thought they did deserve to be up there, but they just did not happen to be in any of the catalogs that I sent up there. And we're also looking at some of the works from the Bennett Collection and the Bennett Prize, actually.
Well, thank you.
It's
very kind of you.
I think it's a significant thing that the foundation is doing to an underserved population of artists, women artists, and I think that it's significant that we try to boost the signal, so to speak. I don't think we have quite room yet for everybody, but we've got room for some, and I am also talking to other landers and their partners, Maston and Firefly, which are scheduled to go up in 2022 and 2023. And hopefully, if we can't put these collections that I want on the Astrobotic and Nova Sea landers, hopefully we'll be able to put them on the other landers as well.
Very exciting. It's a very exciting thing. Now, you have had a career as a writer in addition to your many other facets professionally. There clearly is an intersection between the process of creating literature or poetry, haikus, for example, and the process of creating art. And it seems that there is a relationship between that creativity and the creativity of somebody like Einstein or Werner Heisenberg or that group of physicists and cosmologists. And I wonder what your thoughts are about the nature of those processes and the way in which they interrelate.
I think they are, as you say, very interrelated, because it reaches into a deep subconscious part of your mind. The only difference between poetry and science is the language that they speak. When you're a physicist or scientist like Einstein or Bohr or Rutherford, what you're doing when you're coming up with the equations is you're looking at the poetry of the universe, and the language of the universe of creation is mathematics. So it's as valid to write down a mathematical equation that strikes as something beautiful as it is to put together a sonnet with all of its intricacies of form and function, and yet with a structure of rhyme and meter. I'm one of the lucky ones to be able to have a foot in both worlds, because I can appreciate the beauty of an equation at the same time as the beauty of a sonnet. I don't say that facetiously. I've had one case where I mistakenly thought I was a genius. I was working on a problem in graduate school, a mathematical physics problem, and it was just such a difficult problem. And I went to sleep, and I fell into dreaming, and I kid you not, I saw the equations in my dreams as physical entities, and then the equations came together and folded into each other. And this was an 11-dimensional tensor program, and it's hard for me to describe what an 11-dimensional tensor is, but the equations came together, and I saw the solution, and I woke up, and I said, "Oh my God!" I wrote it down, and it was beautiful. And then and I submitted it to my professor the next day. I had 5 other folks in my graduate class at the same time, and he said that this was the most elegant solution that he had ever seen. He had never seen it before. And I thought to myself, "My God, I'm an Einstein." But you know what? It has never happened to me again. So the one and only time that I touched what it might mean to be genius.
The subconscious, the unconscious mind intrudes into our consciousness via the dream. I think there's a famous story in which I'm trying to remember which physicist it was, had the dream in which the snake was biting its tail, and then was able to conceptualize the carbon chain. I think it was benzene, but the notion of a carbon
That's
chain.
exactly right. It was a benzene molecule.
Yes, as I recall. And that does happen to us as individuals. I don't think it renders itself to easy explanation. And it also seems to be fairly episodic. It doesn't happen all the time. We'd spend a lot more time in bed if it did, I think, don't you?
That's right. It has only happened to me once. But that eureka moment has happened to me many times in poetry, where for example, I'm working on something and I can't figure out what the final two lines are going to be, but I know they've got to rhyme with glow or snow, and then eureka, the line comes and there it is. And it's much the same with a painter or an artist who's been working on a piece for weeks and they just don't know how to end this. They've got a person who's looking out at you with an expression and they can't quite get the way the eyes are supposed to be. And then suddenly they realize that, gosh, what I've got to do is I've got to blindfold her. And they paint the blindfold and it works, because now the expression isn't there, but the person can imagine, the viewer can imagine what the expression must be. And that's that eureka moment that you find both in science, in poetry, and in art. And sometimes it's the beauty of being a collector and being someone who appreciates art, don't you think, is sometimes when you're looking at objects, at paintings, at prints, at sculptures, and suddenly you connect with a sculpture and you figure out what that sculpture was trying to say exactly, and voila, it's also a eureka moment for the viewer, for the audience. And you want that eureka moment to, as an artist, to touch the audience.
Frankly, you want it, speaking for myself, you want it as a collector also.
That's right.
I mean, you crave the eureka moment, and that drives the collecting habits of many collectors, I think. That ability to understand what has been presented in a way that is both a compliment to the artist and unique to the individual who's having the experience, the collector or the viewer.
There's a painting in Dr. Schmidt's curation by Irina Gordienko, and it's a painting of a woman with a red headdress in profile. And when I first saw that, I thought, what's she trying to say? What's she doing? And then you see the snail on her shoulder.
Yes.
And that snail has got a spiral on its shell that echoes the spiral of the woman's ear, and it echoes the spiral that's on her head. And you're thinking, wow, you can't put it into words, but you say, eureka, that's it. It's that snail makes everything. Everything in that painting suddenly makes sense visually.
Yes, and just to mention, Irina Gordienko is a wonderful painter. She is in the Bennett Collection also. And it's interesting to me how artists sometimes consciously and sometimes intuitively pick up on both the visual and the conceptual cues contained in the either in the visual in the conceptual part of their work and the conceptual in the visual part of their work, and they find a way of binding them together. The best realist artists, I think, do that.
I really appreciate that in artists, more so because I'm a terrible artist myself. My,
Don't you paint? No painting?
I'm the despair of my mother, who's an abstract artist. She's grounded in the classical arts, and she wanted one of her kids to become an artist. One of them, we all went to kind of science and arts at the same time. But two of us began writing, and one of us became a musician, and no one followed her in the visual arts. So, but instead we make up for it by collecting.
Yes, yes, indeed. For those of you just joining, my guest today is Dr. Samuel Peralta. Dr. Peralta is an entrepreneur, a film producer, a poet, an art collector, and among his most recent endeavors is the curation of a payload of both written and visual artistic works that have been placed on lunar landers, both previously or about to come, and then further into the future. And Dr. Peralta, I wanted to talk about one aspect of your curation, which was the inclusion of a work created by artificial intelligence. And I'm wondering if you can speak to us about some of your motives for that.
Well, this is actually another parallel project that I'm doing at the moment. It's quite exciting, actually, because it goes to the question of what is an artist, and that's why I describe this as something like 1,500 creative artists and one AI, because that one AI is set apart. We don't know yet whether there's true creativity in that or not. You see a lot of news reports now about AIs that have been trained to paint and produce paintings that are indistinguishable from the Impressionists, for example. And what happens is that we've come so far now with machine learning that we're able to train machines to, for example, if we feed a machine a database of trains and we say this is a train, this is a train, this is a train, then it's able to identify trains. That's what machine learning is. But it's become sophisticated enough that you can feed it a lot of impressionistic paintings, and then if you ask it to produce something that looks like it, then it can produce it. Is it original art? We're not sure. My interpretation of it at the moment is the artist is the person, is the collaborative process who created that AI, who trained that AI, and who told that AI to produce the work. Because my feeling is that the AI is a tool, kind of like Photoshop. It's just a very advanced brush, a very advanced digital brush that now has some flexibility in making autonomous decisions on what to paint.
Is there a point? Is there a point at which the depth and quality of machine learning is such that instead of showing an impressionist painting to the machine and teaching it to identify and understand it as such, is there a point at which, because the Impressionists looked at the realists and they said, we can do this differently and better. Is there a point at which the machine looks at what it's been taught, whether it's realism or impressionism or cubism, whatever kind of art you choose, and it then goes off on its own to create a style and type of art that is not previously seen?
We've seen something similar. If you've seen these algorithms that create dreamscapes out of input images, and sometimes these dreamscapes are amazingly phantasmagorical and they look like something out of Hieronymus Bosch or something. But again, the question is, was that done independently by the machine, or was that done because of prompting by the creators of the machine? At the moment, I don't think we have a technology where the machine is totally autonomous or independent of of its creators. Can we imagine a time in the future that this is going to happen? Undoubtedly. It's actually quite amazing what can be done with very simple machines. The AI that I'm setting up, the work by the AI that I'm setting up, is actually a book of poetry, and the AI was written by based on the Open AI standard by a researcher and author in Sri Lanka, Yuanjaya Wijeratne, and I've worked with him in the past, and I've published him, which is how I know him. And he tried this out with some teaching it some Chinese poets, and he managed for it to make the AI come out with passable Chinese-like poetry. So what he did is he knew that I was also a poet in my own right, and he asked if I would help train his machine. So I said, okay, let's see what happens now. So I essentially I also do adaptations of poetry on the side. I've adapted the works of Japanese poets. I'm working on one right now in coordination with several translators. I've adapted some work from Pablo Neruda. And basically what we did was we curated the lessons that this AI would learn from. What people would usually do is just feed everything to this. But I said my own poetic style was created from merging the background of the poets that I like. I've read a lot of T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Frost, Japanese poets, Spanish poets, etc., etc., etc. Coming from the Philippines, I've got the Philippine poets behind me, and it occurs that if you try to put all of these together, you come out with a style which looks like my style. So the question is, if we do a similar thing to the AI, can it come out with a style that's uniquely its own? And we can't say that it's mimicking the Chinese poets or mimicking Neruda or mimicking whatever poet that you've fed it into. Feed it a range of poets and see what it comes up with. And amazingly, the AI machine that we have came out with lines that were sometimes startlingly original, that you thought, wow, did a person write that, or did a machine? It's kind of like a Turing test. If you've heard of the Turing test, a Turing test is where you have a person, an experimenter, who is trying to judge whether something behind the screen that is responding to his questions is a machine or a real human being. So I could ask that person behind the whoever is behind the screen, what is your name? Where were you born? What do you think about the latest movies? Do you like K-pop? Who's your favorite group? What do you think? And that person would send answers to me via computer typed out, right? And then at the end, I judge, okay, is that a person or is that a human being? And we've succeeded so far. There's been success so far in that there's a machine that has already fooled something like the judges about 30% of the time, and it's able to do that. And so this machine was putting out output to a certain degree that when you looked at it, you said, is that Sam's poetry or is that the machine's poetry? Who's actually producing that work? And it was just amazing enough that we decided that we would publish a book about this. We haven't yet gotten to the point where we published it, but when this project hit me and we said, well, why don't we send this up? It'll be the first AI poet that'll go to the moon. So that's what's happened.
So have you given your poet a name? Does our AI poet have a name, Samuel?
The poet is called Osun, O-S-U-N, and I believe that poet has got an Instagram feed at the moment. It's not. It's still writing out its old poems. It's not it hasn't gotten, we haven't yet fed it the new poems but it's on Instagram. We'll see what it does. We'll put it out there in the next year or so, and we'll see. Maybe it's going to win the Pulitzer Prize. Who knows? Maybe we'll put it out there and try to get it published by a regular press and see whether they accept it or not. And if they accept it, it'll be the first press who will be fooled by an AI.
So something. Where do you think the AI machine learning experience leads? What does the future for art look like with the inclusion of artificial creators?
I think it's collaboration, because it is very hard to ascribe sentience to machines, right? And these machines are only going to be as good as the people who program them, really. So they become aids to humans, who I think will always be the true curators, at least in the foreseeable future. And if we're careful enough not to let the robots take over, right?
Well, that trope of the robots taking over has fed multiple generations of science fiction writers.
It makes for good movies.
The Terminator's a great idea, you know, but in an artistic context, it's interesting to think about an independent actor in the form of a machine operating as a creator, competing with human agents doing the same type of work. Do you foresee that?
I think that's already happening. If what you're saying is you're looking at simulated avatars, you don't even have to do that with robots. Right now, you have engines for video games called such as the Unreal Engine that creates avatars that can look very realistic and are essentially fed by algorithms that make them act very realistic as well. There was a Final Fantasy movie that came out a few years ago which was a photorealistic movie, and all of the actors were just simulated. None of the down to the lead actor were all simulated, and that was quite a feat. It didn't look super realistic, and you knew that they were simulated, but one can envision the technology getting better and better so that you couldn't tell. We've already seen Michael Jackson appear in hologram, for example, at one of the award shows. That was taken from archival footage, but you can very easily create Golem out of somebody wearing a harness and having a computer overlay the look of Golem over an actor, and just doing that with already predetermined motions of a simulated avatar it's not too difficult to imagine.
So in your contemplation, what happens to truth in a world where that capability enables you to create, using your example, Michael Jackson, and have him star in a feature-length film that occurs 40 years after his death?
Well, if you've got a world where you've got that technology available, what that does, in my point of view, is it frees human creators to take a step back and take a grander look at things. Someone would have had the conception to be able to do that Michael Jackson film, and it would have been a human. And by the time we reach the point where it's a machine that creates that conception and puts it into play, I think that humans would have stepped back and taken a bigger picture of it. So I don't see humans being pushed out, but I see humans being freed to do other things that are more important and more creative. If you think about Star Wars, for example, the original Star Wars films the backgrounds of the scenes, the thousands of stormtroopers, the stars, the starships, all of those are matte painting. Those are done by artists that painstakingly paint every single stormtrooper in there. But as times progressed from the 70s, now all they do is they copy and paste stormtroopers with the new tools, and it's the same thing with the digital actors and actresses. What it is now is I don't have to contend with an actor who's always late, or who's who's a diva on stage, or who asks for exorbitant amounts of money. You now have enough budget to pay other people, the creatives, the artists who create the art for the new little stormtroopers. And that's what I mean. It's AI is a tool for artists, and if you treat it as a tool, there's no fear that humans will be replaced.
So you're a collector and a literary artist in your own right. When you reflect on the future of art, what do you see? You've talked about an AI-enabled future. What would you give advice to aspiring artists today in terms of how to manage and project their careers given a technology-enabled future?
It's not always necessary for an artist, I think, to respond to the technology-enabled future. I think all artists should start with classical training, in the sense that they should be able to draw. They should look at the masters and reproduce what they see and master the techniques of the masters. It's like Picasso. What Picasso said is to one of his students, I think, is first learn how to paint like a master. After that, you're free to do anything you want. And Picasso lived by that. And that quote has been it has been paraphrased many times by many artists. Someone else said, "Learn to draw like the masters. After that, no one will question you." So that's what you should do first. Learn the basics all the time. Too often, I've seen, I go out and I see artists who for whom it's you can see that they don't start out with draftsmanship skills at all. They feel that it's enough for me to express myself in this way, and then that's it. But you haven't learned the language of art. It's like a physicist claiming that they have a new theory of the universe, but they can't really speak mathematics. Mathematics is the language of physics. You've got to learn it first. And it's not, and people may say, well, I don't need to, I can just express myself. But that's a lazy way of doing it, I think. So you've got to put the work in. And it doesn't take 10 years to be able to master that. Some people can do it more or less. Now, if they want to engage with technology, if they're looking at technology and they're fearing it, my advice would be, don't fear it. Look at it as look at technology as just a tool. It's a new tool. It's like when the iPad came out, and artists began experimenting on drawing with the iPad. I forget the name of the artist now. He's a British artist. He does the splash paintings. But anyways, he was a conventional figural artist. And then when the iPad came out, he started experimenting with the iPads. Previous to that, he started experimenting with copying machines, using copying machines to create collages and things like that. So every piece of technology that comes is a way to produce new art. Cameras, people said, well, photography, that's useless. That's not art. That just reproduces what you see. But But really, if you push the limits of that tool to what it can do, photography becomes just as artistic as any other art form. So don't be afraid of technology. Think of it as a tool that you can use to express art in a new way.
Very good. And so, in the several minutes we have left, what do you have on the horizon? You've got landers that are yet to launch. What other things do you see yourself undertaking in the years to come?
Well, we're going to see. There's a lot of. I've been feeling the lure of poetry again, and I haven't written for poetry for a while. I got distracted by writing speculative fiction, and then I got distracted by art, and I got distracted by AI. But I'm starting to feel poetry again, and I think I'm going to settle back into poetry for a little bit and see where that takes me. I'm going to finish the Future Chronicles. I've published 21 plus volumes, and I've promised people 25 volumes. The last one being the Mars Chronicles, and I'm hoping to put the Mars Chronicles on Mars itself.
How cool!
I don't know whether that's going to happen. We'll see. There are people testing things right now, but we shall see. There's a few other experimental things I want to do, but so far the things have been going pretty well.
Well, obviously so. Dr. Samuel Peralta, this has been a fascinating hour. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Dr. Samuel Peralta, an acclaimed poet, a scientist, an entrepreneur, a film producer, and a space curator, a man whose work has studied, considered, and is going to consider a new future for both the arts and technology. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Peralta, he and his work can be found on his websites, samuelperalta.com and incandence.com, and we invite you to go there. This is Steve Bennett for the Bennett Podcast. Again, Dr. Peralta, thank you, and thank you all for joining. We'll see you next time.